Group B rally lasted from 1982 to 1986. It was seen as one of the most exciting eras of racing the world has ever seen. There will never again be anything quite like it, and many consider it to be the best motoring series in history, and is not surprising looking back. With unlimited boost, cars exceeding 600 horsepower, and nothing between spectators and the tracks, Group B is still seen as one of the most exciting eras of racing to ever take place on planet Earth. The cars which came out of it are downright legendary, and this 4-year period birthed some of the most significant automotive innovations in decades, especially thanks to the Audi Quattro. With that all taken on board, there was of course one glaringly obvious downside which eventually led to its demise. Group B was incredibly dangerous. Now Formula 1 back in the day had its own safety issues unsurprisingly, but Group B was something to behold. Spectators were all too happy to risk their lives to get as close as possible to the action, especially if they were equipped with cameras. It wasn't just the fans that were causing problems though. When you've got tracks like this, taken at break-neck speeds in cars like this, paired with the extremely competitive environment for drivers and crews alike, it was going to end in disaster. The most infamous Group B crash was Henri Toivonen's in 1986, which ultimately ended it. But today, we're going to take a look at another tragic crash which happened in the same year. Many see this incident as being largely responsible for the end of Group B, with Toivonen's being the final straw. During the third round of the World Rally Championship in Portugal near Sintra, a Portuguese driver by the name of Joaquim Santos was getting ready to show off his skills at the wheel of an RS200. Alongside him sat his co-driver Miguel Oliveira. Tensions were high that day. There was already a very apparent issue which a number of drivers had already voiced concerns over. The spectators were everywhere and out of control. The WRC had become massively popular over the few years prior, especially in Portugal, and there were parts where it was downright impossible for the number of spectators to fit. Given that one of the stages was in Sintra, just half an hour from Lisbon, Portugal's capital, many of the drivers knew that there was going to be trouble. The route's starting time had been adjusted recently from running in the late afternoon into the evening back to 9:15 in the morning. Before the first stage opened up, the Lagoa Azul, or Blue Lagoon, countless fans flooded in to get a good spot to watch the roughly 3-mile long stretch. It's noted the stage was fairly straight as rally stages go, so the speeds the drivers would be able to reach were going to be considerably higher than average. By the time 9:15 came round and the racing would begin, thousands of spectators had made their pilgrimage from far and wide. There were so many eager fans that the drivers knew they had merely inches to either side, which is just an impossible degree of tolerance to deal with. Almost immediately after the racing began, the first sign of the imminent disaster waiting to happen came. A spectator with appalling judgment decided to run across the road just as Rural's Quattro sped towards him. The spectator was luckily not hit, but he narrowly escaped with his life by a matter of millimeters. Not too long afterwards, Timo Salonen hit a cameraman whilst driving a Peugeot 205. Luckily the collision didn't end in a fatality, but the cameraman was pretty seriously injured with a number of broken bones and a decimated camera. Generally, commenters blame neither the cameraman nor Salonen. He was effectively pushed onto the track from too many spectators cramming into the space behind him, leaving the cameraman forced to stand in the road. Salonen did manage to finish the race, albeit with a pretty battered car and a few pieces of trim missing. Naturally, the crews were downright furious about the complete lack of organisation and crowd control in place. Immediately after Salonen got to the end, the officials received an earful, to which they presumably shrugged their shoulders because there was nothing they could do besides cancel the event. Mere minutes after this all kicked off, Santos and Oliveira sped off the starting line in the RS200. He'd had a ton of practice in the car, and Oliveira was his long-time co-driver. With experience in the car and on the stage, he was eager to show what they were capable of. Shortly after setting off though, disaster struck. Rather than piece together what's going on myself, it's worth taking a look at Oliveira's account of the event. There is the fastest part of the stage. You come onto a straight, and then you have a right-hand bend, which is very, very fast. It's almost no bend. It's fifth gear, almost maximum. In the training, Joachim was doing 200 kilometers an hour at that point. After that, you're slowing down for a left-hand bend. The road was completely packed. There were people and people and people. When Joachim came out of the right-hand corner, one guy steps into the tarmac, so he has to make a correction, and when he made the correction and tried to come back to normal, the rear of the car went. He lost it. He then goes on to say he continued reading the pace notes because over the years he'd learned to be able to read whether or not the car was controllable. Unfortunately, Santos wasn't able to regain control this time. Then, bump, bump, bump. I didn't see anybody. I didn't see anything because everything was on the left side of the car. I felt a whack, whack, whack of the car hitting people. But then I came out from the right and they took me and put me in a car. At the time, Oliveira had no idea just how bad their crash had been. 32 spectators lay strewn around the wrecked car, seriously injured. Tragically, 3 spectators instantly lost their lives, among them a mother and her 11-year-old son. The third on-site fatality was unfortunately another child. One of the injured spectators also passed away later on in hospital, making a total toll of 4. With well in excess of 30 serious injuries to people who weren't even racing, it was clear that something had to be done. Mark Juez, who was behind the RS200, warned the officials to stop the stage after he'd gone past. He told the race officials what he'd just seen on the rally stage, but it didn't have an immediate effect. This was shocking, bearing in mind a number of ambulances needed to immediately access the injured people and get them to safety. Before this could happen, more than 10 cars followed Juez down the stage. Since the officials were showing complete disregard for safety, the crews came together and had a meeting. A number of crews clubbed together and outlined a list of reasons why they did not want to continue on with the Portuguese rally, but even this effort didn't stop the rally from going ahead. Not only did the officials disregard the requests from these crews, but they also condemned their behaviour. Ari Vatanen spoke about the problem that day. In Italy and places like this, it was difficult to control the fans at the time, but in Portugal, it was impossible. I remember driving the Sintra stages, waving my fist at these crazy people in the road. You drive down this human corridor, it was an accident waiting to happen. Ultimately, even the scale of this crash did little to put off the organisers, and an additional 2 huge crashes followed shortly afterwards that year, which acted as the final nails in the Group B coffin. This incident was tragic across the board, and is still seen by many as the low point of the sport. From race officials not even bothering to halt the rally, to downright dismissing requests from a number of concerned crews, the responsibility of a catastrophe like this has to be placed partially on this group. Unlike some freak motorsport accidents, this tragedy was clearly preventable. Whether Santos and Oliveira would have still crashed or not is besides the point. Spectators were simply too close to the action for the event to be even remotely safe, and nothing was done about it, which shows complete disregard for human life. Given that a very near miss and a collision with a cameraman had already happened that morning, the rally should have been halted and spectators should have been moved. Given that there was clearly a lack of staff to help with crowd control and dispersing people into safer areas, something like this was going to happen. Group B fans were definitely known to be crazy, but ultimately if no one was there to tell them to move, it's not really on them. You have to remember that although occasional crashes into spectators did happen, it was this event which changed the public's opinion on just how close to rallying people should get. There are still a number of races in which spectators can stand very close, but it's extremely rare that any race event on Earth shows even a fraction of the level of blatant disregard for safety as this rally.